Okay, so get ready for a deep dive that might kind of turn your thinking on its head a little bit.
Ooh, I like where this is
We're
going.
going to be looking at this article by Gender Benson
Okay.
called Balancing Identity, Being a Republican and a Crossdresser.
Interesting combo.
Right, you hear those two things and you're like, wait,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
But Jen's article really digs into, like, how is that possible?
Yeah, how do those two things go together?
How do these identities work together? Because they can,
Totally.
and it's not as unusual as we might think.
It's about challenging those assumptions we all have, you know?
Yeah.
Like we see a label like Republican or crossdresser and
Ah.
boom, our brains just fill in all these blanks.
Totally. We think we know everything about that person.
Exactly, and that's what Jen's getting at in this article. Like
Yeah.
those assumptions, often way off.
So off base, like she uses this example, right?
Okay.
She's like, cross-dressers are doctors, they're teachers.
Right.
They're parents, they're pilots. Like, it's not this like niche group that we sometimes imagine. Exactly. And it's not tied to one specific political view.
Yeah, and I think that's where understanding a little bit of history can be helpful.
Yep.
So it's true, you know, gender nonconformity
Right.
has often been linked with like progressive movement.
People pushing boundaries.
Yeah, challenging those norms.
Right.
But we got to remember personal choices like clothing makeup
Yeah.
doesn't equal your entire political ideology.
It's not a one-to-one thing.
Definitely not.
And that actually leads into this fascinating point that the article brings up about how conservative values
Okay.
themselves could actually like support the choice to cross-dress.
Huh.
So we're talking about things like individual freedom,
Right.
limited government, those classic conservative principles.
Yeah.
And Jen's arguing that those could actually align with
With the desire for personal expression.
exactly, even if it's outside of what we think of as traditional gender norms.
Wow, that really flips the script, doesn't it?
It does. It makes you think about conservatism in a whole different light.
It challenges that kind of monolithic view that a lot of people have. Right?
Totally. Not every conservative is like cookie cutter.
Exactly. There's so much nuance there.
So much nuance.
And, you know, even historically, there are figures who you could say were conservative, but also like push those boundaries.
Really? That's so interesting. I'd love to hear about that sometime.
Oh, yeah, we could do a whole deep dive on that.
I'm adding it to the list for sure.
That's a long list.
It is. But this one's going on there. Okay, so we've talked about stereotypes,
Yeah.
how they don't always hold up, and this idea that conservative values
Right.
can actually align with cross-dressing.
It's fascinating.
And this brings us to this other big idea in Jen's article about privacy
Okay.
being super important for a lot of conservative cross-dressers.
Interesting.
Why do you think that might be?
Well, I think for a lot of people, it's about where those personal values and political leanings kind of intersect.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Like for a conservative crossdresser, self-expression might be
Yeah.
a really personal thing.
Not like a political statement.
Exactly. It's about individual choice. It's about autonomy.
Right.
And they might not feel the need to shout it from the rooftops.
Makes sense. Especially when you consider that emphasis on personal responsibility
Right.
in conservative thought.
It's like, make your choices, live your life.
Yeah,
You don't have to broadcast everything.
you're not obligated.
Totally. And that can actually be really freeing.
Freeing in what way?
Well, it takes away some of that societal pressure.
Like those expectations
Yeah.
that you have to like announce everything.
Exactly. It's your own journey.
And there's this great comparison in the article about how
Okay.
a liberal crossdresser might be more open about their identity,
Right.
maybe even advocating for visibility and acceptance,
Yeah.
while the conservative one might be more private.
More about discretion.
Yeah, like different values shaping how people approach the same identity.
That's really insightful. And it's important to acknowledge both are valid.
Totally.
It's not about saying one's right and one's wrong.
No, it's about understanding.
Yeah, different comfort levels, different ways of approaching things.
People are on their own journeys.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about how stereotypes don't always hold up,
Right.
how conservative values can align with cross-dressing.
Totally.
But let's be real, this isn't always easy.
No, it's not.
The article talks about how conservative cross-dressers might face some challenges,
Yeah, like what kinds of things?
well, especially when they're trying to balance their self-expression
Right.
with what their communities expect.
Yeah, there's that potential for judgment.
Yeah,
Maybe even rejection from family, friends, colleagues.
and that must be so tough to navigate.
Especially in today's political climate.
Yeah, it's so polarized.
It can feel like you have to pick a side.
Exactly. And for someone in this situation,
It's like, do you stay silent
and feel inauthentic.
or risk alienating the people you care about?
It's a tough spot to be in.
No easy answers.
And you can see why that fear of being misunderstood,
Right.
of being stereotyped or judged, it might make them want to keep things private.
It's about protecting yourself.
But this is what I found really interesting. Jen mentions how some conservative crossdressers, because of their experience, might actually be more understanding of other people.
Interesting.
Who have parts of their lives they don't share openly.
Like they get it because they've lived it.
Exactly.
That's a powerful connection.
Unspoken, but there.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes back to that conservative idea of
personal responsibility.
Yeah, you make your choices.
You live your life.
But you don't force your views on others.
It's about respecting that everyone has their own path.
Their own journey.
Exactly. And that's something I think we can all learn from.
I agree.
It's about finding that balance.
Between self-expression and discretion.
And ultimately, it's about living authentically.
Even if it means holding seemingly contradictory views.
Yeah, embracing that complexity.
And being okay with not fitting neatly into a box.
That's where the real growth happens.
Okay, so we're talking about this idea of balancing different parts of ourselves.
Right. Like, how do you hold these seemingly opposite ideas or identities?
And Jen puts it so well in the article.
What'd you say?
She says, being a Republican and a crossdresser is not a contradiction.
Oh, I like that.
Right. It can be an affirmation of individuality and your commitment to living authentically.
That's powerful.
It really is. It's like embracing who you are.
Yeah, even the parts that seem to clash.
Exactly.
And I think that's something we often miss, right?
What do you mean?
We tend to put people in these neat little boxes.
Like Republican or crossdresser?
Exactly. And then we think we know everything about them.
But it's so much more complex than that.
So much more.
So how do we start to understand this idea of balance?
Of holding these different parts of ourselves.
Yeah, like how is that even possible?
Well, I think it starts with recognizing that identity isn't this fixed thing.
It's not like you check a box and you're done.
Right. It's fluid. It's multifaceted.
Okay.
It's more like a spectrum with all these different aspects kind of blending together.
I see what you're saying. So it's not about either or?
Exactly. It's about both and.
And this applies to way more than just politics and cross-dressing.
Absolutely. This is something that's relevant for everyone.
So like how...
Think about it. Have you ever met someone who surprised you?
Like their views didn't quite line up with what you expected.
Exactly. We see their job title or their clothes or their car.
And we think we know their whole story.
But then they say something or do something.
And you're like, whoa, I did not see that coming.
That's what we're talking about.
That's that iceberg thing again, right?
Yeah, we're only seeing the tip.
There's so much more beneath the surface.
And that's where empathy comes in.
Being able to see things from someone else's perspective.
Even if it's different from our own.
Even if it seems contradictory.
And Jen even touches on this in the article.
How?
She says that conservative crossdressers might actually be more understanding of others who have personal aspects of their lives.
That they don't share openly.
Yeah, because they've been there. They get it.
That's a really powerful point.
It's about recognizing that privacy can be a valid choice.
Not everything needs to be a public declaration.
And that connects back to that conservative principle of personal responsibility.
Make your choices.
Live your life.
But respect others' right to do the same.
Absolutely.
So it's like approaching every interaction with a fresh perspective.
Exactly, like a blank slate.
Without all that baggage of our preconceived notions.
Yeah, and who knows what we might find when we do that.
We might discover common ground where we least expected it.
Build connections with people we thought were totally different from us.
And that's what's so exciting about this whole idea of embracing complexity.
Yeah, it's not about shying away from differences.
It's about leaning into them.
Recognizing that those differences are what make us interesting.
What make life vibrant.
And ultimately what make us human.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
yeah,
what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this conversation?
That's a good one. I think it's this look beyond the labels.
Don't let them define people.
Exactly, because there's always more to the story.
There's always more beneath the surface.
And when we take the time to dig a little deeper,
to listen to each other's stories,
we might just be surprised by what we find.
We might discover that we have more in common than we thought.
And that's a beautiful thing.